Okay, and welcome to the final session. Thanks for sticking around. What I'd like to talk to you about today is what I'd consider a fundamental missing piece in the stewardship puzzle. We've heard a lot from the schemes that are existing. We know about the Act that's going under review. It's something that I won't be talking about today, but what I will be taking you is right back to the beginning. And that is what happens when a product is listed. And something that we've developed at Equilibrium, which is a process that steps you through a series of activities that will take you from a listed product through to the implementation of a scheme. And I think Libby touched on it, is that we don't have a coordinated approach. And there's a lot of inefficiencies run without a coordinated approach. To give you some context, Equilibrium have been working in the environment sustainability space for about 10 years, just under. Across many of the product stewardship schemes that you'll know. We've been designing, implementing in some cases, assessing, auditing and writing methodologies to improve these schemes moving forward. And just that, take you to the last point there, that it's a new one. We've designed a trial to test the hypothesis of child safety seat recovery. Not necessarily environmental, but massive human safety benefits. Before we start on the process, I want to ask you a question. Would anybody consider buying a new car that hadn't gone through a rigorous testing, production process? I wouldn't. I spent 10 years plus in the manufacturing sector. Before any product went to market, it was rigorously tested, and it went through a beautiful manufacturing process, especially such as a car is a fairly large financial investment. And I would argue that product stewardship is a very large financial investment and also a time investment. You wouldn't know if your airbags went off or your brakes would work. Windows. We've seen with one car manufacturer, its fuel economy was questionable. So maybe there's a process that's been skipped. And you wouldn't even know if it would start in the morning. So it's this type of process that, and I apologise now, I'll be mentioning the word process a lot, but what I want you to take away is this is the fundamental piece that is missing. So if manufacturers have a process to put products onto the market, then we should have a process to recover them back through product stewardship. As I mentioned before, we have an Act. On the other side, right up front, we have a product list. Now, I'm not going to argue whether the list or the Act is working. The review will undertake that. What I'm saying is that we have bookends. So what do you do when your product is listed? If you're a state government, what do you do about it? How do you ensure that you have all the right information to get to a decision point? Jump straight to regulation causes inefficiencies, potentially has inaction. Could argue with the battery case. Ultimately, what we have to do is we have to sit through a load of activities that will give us a business and policy case for government and industry to make an informed decision. Continue voluntarily or seek regulation. If we have a coordinated approach that steps you through, it's transparent. Anybody could jump either online or have a look at each product on the list and see where it is in this process to implementation. Right now, we don't have that. It's very covert. So this is it. It's pretty simple. Products listed, you need a management structure with good governance. So an implementation working group is formed. It has a number of steps. Underneath each of one of these, you'll have terms of reference formed, roles and responsibilities, project budget, timeline. How long do you think it's going to take? Some of the information that's required. Who are the free riders that we know of now? Which industry partners and participants and government want to put their hand up? Step 2, gather the information. A lot of the information is missing and trials need to be undertaken. Under step 2, we have a check sheet of many of the things you can gather to inform a trial. Trial into design. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to develop number 4 here. That's the critical point. It's the business and policy case for product stewardship. This is the point industry make a decision. They have enough information. We've seen with the paint scheme, it's 4 to 10 times more expensive with EPR. They choose voluntary. Can you manage the free riders, but increase the cost? Are you willing to relinquish control of your industry scheme for a level playing field? These are the questions that need to be answered, and they can't be answered unless you have the right information. Once that decision point is made, then industry has everything they need to either continue on the voluntary path or seek regulation under the framework of the Act. So we're now at the other end. The scheme can then be designed using all the information that's gathered in point 2 and 3, then implemented. Making it sound a lot easier than it is, but without this type of process, we're seeing 10-year lead times. Oil, TV and computers, tyres, paint, 10-year plus. And I spent 8 years on one. I don't have the time to keep running through these. So with something that's transparent, at any point in time, you can see where each product is in its development. Funding. Always a critical question, right? So steps 1 to 4, mostly funded by government. This is where government, state government, Commonwealth government put their hand in their pocket and create a project with sufficient funding to develop the business and policy case. Industry will fund some of it, in kind, data, evidence, experience, but mostly government. 5 and 6, joint funding. Design the scheme. The decision point is costly in time, could go through a number of CEOs or up through the meeting of environment ministers, but joint funded. And then finally, mostly funded by industry. This is where local government would have to provide perhaps some infrastructure, some in kind. This structure will provide a joint funded, accountable, transparent system. And everyone has a vested interest from start to finish. It's very important. This will take a minimum of 3 years. Greatly reduced from 10, but it will take a long time. The evidence gathered at points 2 and 3 is absolutely critical. Like I said, we have a checklist. This is just some of the things you need to do. You know, in the case of batteries, is the consumer willing to pay? What is it, 1 cent, 2 cents, 5 cents a cell? In the case of paint, we had 95% of 2,000 consumers at a retail outlets willing to pay 50 cents a litre. The industry assumed they didn't want to pay any. The retailers said they wouldn't even pay a cent. We got the information, we said different. So once you've stepped through all of the evidence and more, you can then form the business case and the policy case. Sounds it's a simple process. It takes time, but it's transparent, and people can follow a stepped approach. This is where the crux of it gets. So the business case and the policy case. We know what the problem is. Too often, we haven't got the right problem. We haven't defined the problem we want to attack. So, and I come back to batteries because it is in development. It's been many years in development, and we've all, had our piece to play in it. Is it alkaline? Alkaline you can legitimately put into recycling. Into landfill, because very rarely does it contain any nasties. Can the consumer define between the two? Do we assume that? Or is it just rechargeables? So once the problem is defined, you can then start looking at what is the product subclass. In the case of paint, bagged render was out. Wasn't required. Perhaps we need to redefine the product, the listed product, and have some subclasses within that. Then you can start looking at your material flow and your evidence. The benefits of voluntary approach, now working for the whole of the 8 years with the paint industry, and more from 2013 when the product was listed in the Secretariat all the way through to when the PSO was created and Paint Back was implemented. They always preferred a voluntary approach when the access requirements of the NTCRS was shown, the material recovery rates of the NTCRS were shown, and the costs of EPR internationally outweighed the free riders. And even the potential of free riders, like large paint manufacturers coming into the Australian market, they had the evidence. Voluntary is considerably cheaper. Industry get to own and design their own scheme. I mentioned the subclass before. It's a critical piece that is often overlooked. Maybe the whole product class is just too big. Self-audited and assessed, and industry is far more agile to make efficiencies in changes rather than government. We've seen with the review of the TV and computer scheme, it was one of the best pieces of Commonwealth reactiveness I've seen. It was 9 months for consultation, RIS changes. The community demand was 50%, the recovery rate was 33%, but it still took 9 months. Now industry, you could argue, would be able to do that quicker. We know the free riders. The downside is it's not a level playing field. So you've got to weigh up the balance. And Paintback provided me that photo. That's Craig from Outlook Environmental in Hampton Park. 15 years he's been at the coalface of collecting products, and he said without a doubt this Paintback scheme is the most fantastic thing he's seen, because he's got tradies now dropping up, whereas before he'd be turning them away. I'm not going to go into the types of the schemes, but you can see we've got 4 available in Australia. Most people talk about the 3. There are 4. You can be a voluntary scheme without being accredited. You've got the accredited, the co-reg, and the mandatory. The major difference between the 2, free riders and cost and control. And how can you balance those 2? And the only way to find that is gathering all the information, trialling it, and developing the business case and the public policy case for that. So I'm going to wrap it up, the last session of the day. And I don't know about you, but I fancy a beer. By following this approach, we can have a transparent process that will take you from a listed product to scheme design. Industry can design it up front rather than sit back and wait for government to take over. Should all the information be required, they may seek regulation. But because they've followed this process, you will have a faster implementation. When estimating on this, we've done some modelling, it's 3 to 5 years as opposed to 10 plus, because everybody knows where they are on the stepped process. And finally, we'll have more confidence, like the car manufacturers, we'll have more confidence, you as a consumer, as a stakeholder, that the scheme will work and it won't require expensive fixing. Thank you.